Hi, I'm Dr. Zach Moore, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
So yeah, we are rolling already. So we're back from our little break. We want to kind of circle back around to some of the topical stuff. First, though, I was going to so just to outline how the first couple minutes of this is going to go. Randall is going to give a statement about something that we wanted to talk about right quick for like 30 seconds or so, and then Daniel is we're going to throw it to Daniel for something that I was going to bring up. And so, without further ado, I'm going to let Randall talk.
Well, mine's actually, maybe it's more of a question, and it's towards Daniel. And you'd mentioned before about your father's suicide and how that played an important role in your belief system. I also I have a brother who committed suicide. Had a different effect on me. When my brother committed suicide, I saw lots of people coming to my family, and particularly my mother, trying to bring her solace over this horrible situation, saying things that weren't any part of the Bible that I understood about suicide, trying to convince her that somehow my brother was in heaven, when it wasn't what I was taught at all when I was growing up. And that really kind of led to a lot of my skepticism of, I don't understand that this is such a firm belief. How is it so easy to shake up because there's a crying woman in the room? And I saw lots of people being very emotional, and how are you able to make such an important decision about your very existence at a time when you're probably the least rational in your life?
Well, it didn't. The belief didn't follow the suicide.
I thought that's what you said.
Well, I mean, I condensed the story for time's sake, but
Okay.
Suicide occurred when I was 17, and I didn't come to Christ until I was 25 or 26. And that was a process in and of itself that in those intervening 9 years, I could tell you a lot of things that I thought about God. So it wasn't on the heels of my despair, in the throes of despair even, that decision came about. But I don't pretend to undermine or to be able to solve the dilemma of what happens to a soul who takes his or her own life. I absolutely don't have a view one way or the other in terms of Tony Dungy, the former coach of the Indianapolis Colts. His son took Rick Warren's son. There are Christians that do this, and there are non-Christians that do this. What goes through a soul at the point of that terrible time, I don't know. But if Christ's suffering does not come down into that, then he's not the Messiah to me.
Hey, we agree.
Yeah.
When my dad died, he got the best death I think anybody ever gets. He had enough forewarning. My brother called me to tell me that I needed to drive up from Texas to Colorado to go see my dad because it was the last chance I was going to get. And I got there within hours of my dad passing.
Wow.
And I found myself in a room full of people, all my dad's ex-wives. What kind of a man do you gotta be that all your ex-wives are there? That's a statement.
It's like J.R. Ewing's funeral.
Yeah. Clap.
Yeah.
But all the people that worked for him, and everybody paid him respects. I knew a lot of the things that I've been told about my dad. What an evil, vindictive, judgmental, criminal son of a bitch my dad was. But none of that mattered in his last few hours of life. It was people paying him their respects. I wish I could be that forgiven for all the shit that I've done.
Just today.
Oh, too soon.
In that moment, I know horrible things that have been said to about my dad from many different people, but my dad had the room full of people who respected him, and he knew that he was going to die within 24 hours. And I remember my mother, this was a beautiful thing, my mother says, "Do you want me to bring the Mormon missionaries to come pray for you?" And his eyes darted from her to me. And he said, "No, I think it's too late for that." I'm like, yes! Because I always thought my dad was gullible. I mean, he thought Doug Henning was doing real magic. Okay? So for him, his eyes to dart to mine to say that it's too late, that was amazing for me. And then he didn't want anybody to remember him in any kind of a lesser than admirable period. So when he thought he was beginning to hallucinate because of the drugs they were giving him at this moment, he threw us all out of the room.
I can't speak for the other atheists here, but I can say for myself that when I've encountered death, that has always been an issue that, for lack of a better term, strengthens my atheism, because I just see people using religion to make themselves feel better. And I've never been at a funeral where it says, well, he's going to hell, he didn't live a very good life.
Yeah.
That it's always very, very nice platitudinal things to make people feel like something better is going to happen. And to me, that's just always just strings of bullshit.
I
It's
think
not real.
something that we shouldn't argue about is that we need to inject some much needed levity into those kinds of situations so that we don't fall into the trap of.
But pervading all of these discussions is this distinction between a belief that makes you feel good. It may very well feel good to think that your loved one is in a better place. I'm sure it does. It feels good to think that when you die, your life will continue. It feels good to think that when you have trouble in this world, you've got a helper. Those things are all true, and it's not difficult to understand why someone would be drawn to an ideology that makes them feel this way. But that doesn't make it true, right? I mean, if I spend the whole weekend believing that I won the Powerball, I'm going to be euphorically happy, and then I go in Monday and realize I had the numbers reversed and I didn't actually win. Well, the feelings I had all weekend were real, and they weren't because I won the Powerball. They were because I believed I won the Powerball. And so that's why, when there's an idea that's very attractive to us, I think we should really put up our skeptical antenna and say, okay, am I clinging to this because I like it? Mm-hmm. I remember I was a Christian 27 years. I know what that felt like. I know how good it felt to think I was on the winning team. But when I came to believe this isn't true, the fact that it felt good isn't enough, right? It has to actually be true. I had the numbers reversed. I thought I'd won the lottery and I didn't.
Yeah.
I got to finish the rest of this. I mean, I made the foolish mistake of walking out of this room, and I left my jacket behind. And I realized I left my fucking jacket in that room. I got to go back into that room and get my jacket. So I was the oldest child, so I gave my dad the hug, and I walked out, and my sons, and my brothers did too. And then I came back in, and I said, I left my fucking jacket in this room, and I'm just crying all over myself. I left my jacket in this room, and I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to get one more hug. And my dad said the most profound thing he'd ever said in his life. He says, I'll give you the last one I got.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Oh, now I'm going to cry.
What do you do?
How do you not cry at that?
Yeah.
And and this guy was reputed to have killed 4 people and over a dozen dogs, and he had killed more animals than he had ever bought in a grocery store to eat. I mean, the man was okay with killing things, He was a hard, cold, evil son of a bitch. I remember my daughter, when she met him, and she was like, I don't understand why does everybody say bad things about Grandpa? Grandpa says really nice. And then my aunt says, oh no, you don't know. Let me tell you. Evil son of a bitch that he was. And he gets this he gets this death? I'm not going to get this death. The best I can hope for is that somebody is that an 18-wheeler won't signal when he turns lanes, and I don't drive and I ride it without a helmet, and I'll be run over by all 9 wheels on one side. That's the best I can hope for. I'm not going to get a death like my dad got.
Do you think that let's get back? I'm sorry, okay. I don't want to, because it was supposed to be a small statement.
My one chance.
But that's great. But I got to close the gate. I got to close the gate at some point. So just try not to drop the transmission out of this conversation, but let's change hard change in gears.
He just threw it in reverse at 50.
Yeah, we're gonna throw it in reverse, and we're just gonna go back around to getting into staying on the topics that we originally were trying to touch on. So this little thing I was gonna. We touched on it. Let's get back into the conversation about it.
You said Isaiah.
Let's flesh this out. Let's tease apart some of these concepts and stuff.
This poor guy is not on camera. We just hear he's just an empty voice.
Yeah, I'm just somebody
back of my hat.
He's the Peanuts teacher.
So we can pretty much all agree that Nostradamus wasn't a divine being. He wasn't, anybody special.
I'm pretty sure the atheists will agree that he was not a
Right.
divine
At least,
being.
at least one section of these
We
guys.
all have a
think
spark
we're all-
of the
I think we're all
divine.
good.
right?
But the truth remains is that a lot of his quatrains and a lot of the stuff that he said was recorded, was written down, and he made a lot of eerily accurate predictions about many. I don't know if you can call them prophecies, but
Like what? Give us an example.
so
Yeah, I went through this,
The
and his
biggest
whole thing
one-
about Hitler, for example,
well, okay, so
and
so we got World War
the
II.
king of fear descending from the heavens, that was the first falsifiable thing that he said.
right.
You know, because that was supposed to have happened, what was it, in 1999 or somewhere thereabouts?
Well, that was his prediction for the end of the world. It
Right.
was supposed to happen in September of '99. It's actually one of the few things
Yeah.
he said that was incredibly specific and didn't get.
I was dating a Christian woman at the time, and I was so delighted. I'm like, he's fucking wrong.
So we got World. So you mentioned World War II. We got even 9/11 is supposedly said to have been predicted by him in one of the.
If you change all the words, all the meanings of all the
right.
words, so that it becomes prophetic lange
Right.
and can mean 5 things at once, then you can
Well,
do
the
that.
biggest thing you asked me what the biggest thing was. So one of the more well-known predictions was that he supposedly predicted Henry II of France to die in a certain year, and that year, 1557, Henry II of France was wounded and died 10 days later when he was wounded in a jousting contest.
Did Nostradamus
So-
say Henry II of France?
I don't know if it was actually
Right.
him by name, but yeah, it was. He said something that pointed.
Some
to the
guy with a
sovereign
beard.
some
that
some
nation
some,
or
some
whatever.
king of some
Yeah,
Nobleman
but I mean,
of
the
the
thing
world.
is that he if you look at it in these terms, he predicted things that later happened, right? So could it be that
Right?
maybe
Is that a question?
that prophecies could be just lucky guesses? So
He didn't predict anything that actually happened.
I think this is an area where we all at the table would agree, because I know, like in Arn, in one of your videos where you start talking about prophecies in Isaiah 53, you saw something I agree with completely, and that's, you had mentioned, the prophecies must be clear
Yeah,
and unambiguous, and I think when it comes to Nostradamus stuff, it's
Right.
so broad that we're not going to be able to get it. I mean,
Fortune cookies can be more
Yeah.
more
Daniel,
precise.
can you tell us something about Isaiah chapter 53?
Yeah.
I think you have something.
Quickly, it's a couple of things you talk a lot about in your video, Aaron, about the Judaic approach to interpreting the servant as Israel. There's in-house Judaic discussion about who the servant is, and there's Christian and Judeo discussion about who the servant is. And theologically speaking, it's probably next to Genesis, maybe the most hotly debated, discussed topic, text of the Old Testament. What is the identity? Who is this servant? It is the fourth of 4 songs of the servant. Now, these were classified as songs back in the late 1900s by I don't know if it was a rabbi or it was a theologian who had classified this, who believed in a second author, a Deutero-Isaiah, and he was trying to categorize the structure of text to try to prove his thesis. But it's very helpful to understand that there are songs of the servant. Now, in Isaiah, the servant, there's a couple of things about a Jewish idea of a servant. One is it could be Job or a Jacob or Abraham or Moses. These are all individuals who were considered servants. Sometimes Jacob is referred to collectively as God's servant, Jacob meaning the people of Israel. And so what's at stake here are how to apply the identity of an Old Testament servant. And the word is a common word in the Old Testament, ebed, from which we would get slave or bond slave. And so the question for the Orthodox Jewish position is that the servant, a traditional position is that the servant is actually Jacob representing the nation of Israel. So the servant is the people of Israel. That's how a lot of Orthodox rabbis interpret it. Of course, the Christians see the sufferings of Christ in this text. So the key thing would be how, I think even you alluded to in your video, that there are some similarities to the suffering Christ of the New Testament in the text. The question is this text foreseeing Christ or is it not? And whether you, I think off the table we can say whether or not you believe the scriptures to be true. I think there's the curious thing is that both Jews and Christians agree that whoever the servant is, that there is an atonement going on here on behalf of the servant. So an Orthodox Jew would explain it as the Jews are atoning for the sins of the Gentiles. This is a typical explanation that I've seen. So the Jewish nation becomes the means by which the rest of the world gets right with God. The Christians, of course, see the actual rabbis have to borrow from Christian theological atonement language in order to efface the idea that this servant was the Messiah, who was Christ. So both Jews and Christians agree that the servant does an atoning work for the sins of the people. And that's just a general summary and background of it. I think the most convincing correlation for me personally between Isaiah 53 and the New Testament is what Paul speaks of Christ in Philippians 2. If I have a moment to read that, just really quickly. It's a short verse. It's Philippians 2.
I think this is where the tortoise overtakes the hare.
Okay. All right. Just briefly, and then I'll stop talking, and we can kind of go along with it. But this is one of the things that convinces me that whether you think Paul existed or not, I think this is an interesting correlation that for sure. Philippians 2:5, let this mind be in you which is also in Christ Jesus, who being the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but he made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, which would translate to the Hebrew ebed, and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Therefore God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, and of those in heaven and those on earth and those under the earth. And so what we see in Philippians 2 here is a humiliation and an exaltation. And that's what we see in the suffering servant as well. The exaltation of the servant in the Isaiah text does not refer to any exaltation of human beings. And so one of the things that makes it difficult for an Orthodox rabbi to interpret this as the nation of Israel is the exaltation that's mentioned at the beginning of this song, which was in 52:10, where my servant will be highly exalted. This language of exaltation is reserved solely for God himself, which makes making the case for 53 as Israel very difficult. Whoever the servant is also has to be a guilt offering for the people. Now, what Isaiah starts with in Isaiah chapter 1 is that Israel is guilty. There is no way that Israel is clean enough to be a guilt offering. And if you look at what the Levitical requirements of cleanliness are, Israel does not make that and does not offer themselves as a sacrifice. They're not clean enough to do that. So it would have to be a metaphorical or poetical understanding from a rabbi's point to make this the case for the nation of Israel. But the debate rages. I have a book that says, here's all the objections from the Jews, here's all the Christian positions, and it's a back and forth.
So I'm not a mythicist. I believe there was a real human Jesus who was really crucified by the Romans, but Aaron has already said he is a mythicist. So a mythicist would say, well, Paul is very aware of that scripture and is making up a character that matches that. I mean, the Old
Worse than that.
The Old Testament came before the New Testament, so they could write in anything they want.
Worse than that.
Right.
Justin Martyr described Jesus as a character that was, he didn't say that Satan went back in time to cast all these previous pagan characters as a.
No, he said he knew about it in advance and counterfeited it ahead of time.
But nobody had ever written about time travel, prior to that time. So I mean, Justin Martin is not talking about time travel.
No.
Justin Martin thought that Jesus was a character that was being depicted in Psalm 19 as being the carrier of the sun across the sky.
Right.
So that Justin Martin, who lived at a time when he could have met people who, if Jesus really existed, Justin Martyr could have met people who had met Jesus. And yet, he thought that Jesus had lived thousands of years earlier. How could he be a early second century church apologist and think that Jesus had existed thousands of years earlier?
The Christians thought Jesus always existed.
The I am statements in John when Jesus offends the Pharisees by saying, before Abraham I was. I think that's where Justin's getting that idea.
He believed Jesus had always existed.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the passage is that you're talking about, Justin Martyr, but are you saying that Justin goes back and says that demons anticipated the Messiah would come?
Well, no, not demons. The devil.
Right. Created the counterfeits ahead of time.
Right.
Yeah, created all of these.
The dying and rising.
For example, the first thing that I did in studying all of this, which was entirely accidental, I'm reading the stories of Dionysus decades ago, and I realized that Dionysus describes himself as the fruit of the vine, and a number of other references that are exactly what Jesus described himself as. And I'm thinking, how can that be? This guy lived at least, if he lived at all, if he was a real person at all, he lived at least 500 years before Jesus. And he described himself 3 different ways in exactly the same way that Jesus described himself centuries later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, correspondence doesn't equal causation, right? I mean, just because there are similarities that exist.
Why
doesn't mean that
why
they are.
would this is my argument. I got into it with a high priest of the Forge Coven in San Antonio, New Mexico, as a pagan coven, and his patron deity was Dionysus. And I said, well, why would God create Jesus as a sequel to an already existent human idea? Right? Why wouldn't he be completely original? So why would Jesus make himself out to be something that had already existed 500 years earlier?
Well, and so remember, I'm not a mythicist,
Yeah.
but I don't think we have any evidence that Jesus certainly claimed to be God or even claimed to be the Messiah. All we have evidence for is that his biographers later said that he said that. So,
And even if Jesus existed, he still didn't declare
didn't
himself
necessarily
to be-
say that, right?
No,
So-
he
so-
said, I am
I don't
one
think we
with
know
God.
what he said.
And so
He didn't write
everybody
a word.
says that Jesus says he's one with God, which means he's the same person as God. But then Jesus later says, can my disciples, he prays to God. He's praying to himself to say that, why can't my disciples be one unto God just as I am one unto God? Which means he is not one unto God. He's not the physical manifestation of God. If he's asking someone else, obviously not himself, if his disciples can be one with God just as he is, then he's talking about a metaphorical one with.
I think I have a good explanation in terms of that.
I don't
Okay.
think so, but go ahead.
Let's hear it.
Purely subjective. I think in the world of physics, in the last 100 years, we know that light itself is duplicitous in its nature. It seems to behave as a discrete packet of energy, and also as a wave function through space.
I like the way he just says that light is deceptive. Deliberately.
No, I didn't say deceptive.
You said
Duplicitous in terms of, from our vantage point, it looks like it's a particle, and it looks like
That's
it's a wave.
not-
Bad word choice. Sorry, forgive me for that.
That is confusing, maybe.
But paradoxical maybe would be a better word choice. But the idea that light promulgates as both a particle and a wave is somewhat similar, and it's no analogy is perfect, but somewhat similar to the difficulties that theologians have had over trying to describe Jesus to both being fully divine and fully human.
Well, it's a little bit different than what you say though, because in quantum.
I don't mean to get into quantum mechanics.
No,
I'm just
but
saying
when
that
you talk about a wave though, you have to mention quantum because we
Yeah.
know a lot about quantum mechanics now. Well, more than
we did.
More than we did. We don't know a lot, but at any
Dude,
point.
you need a second camera on you, because you're the only person in this room that's not on camera at all.
They've
Come
seen
down
him
here.
before.
Come down here.
It's fine.
And no one can tell because he's not on
No,
camera, but
no
he's
analogy
7
is
foot
perfect,
tall,
TJ.
and he's
Right,
orange, and he has 5 tentacles.
One of the big quantum theories that we've kind of gone to steps to demonstrate is that any wave, at any point that you measure that wave, it becomes a particle at the point
Yeah,
that you measure it.
indeterminacy. Yeah.
Well, quantum tunneling it's part of that. It's part of that theory of quantum tunneling. Yeah. So I mean, it's just I just thought it would be
Okay, but I
good
think
to
that-
clarify what you were talking
Sure,
about
sure.
with the
I think your point in bringing up Nostradamus was that
Yeah.
the vagueness of those prophecies look a lot like the vagueness of the prophecies in Daniel and Isaiah.
Yeah.
And so, like, it seems like special pleading to say, oh, well, Nostradamus was just making up very vague
I think
stuff,
it's
and we're fitting it to what
shifting-
actually happened.
It's a shifting of the goalposts.
Do we even
for
believe
sure, I think.
when Nostradamus met the guy who was eventually going to become Pope, Nostradamus like immediately succumbed and kissed the guy's hand and praised him as if he was already the Pope, right? Is there any reason to believe that any of that really happened?
About as much as there is as anything that happened in the Bible, I guess. You know?
We
Most
have
things.
less reason to believe anything that happened in the Bible.
Well, that's what I'm saying. As much, but not anymore, for sure. Yeah.
Well,
This man needs his own camera.
I'm a Nostradamus mythicist, so
You don't think he existed at all?
I don't. So I don't need to address anything that he said.
I'd like to ask how are we so confident that all these things written in the Old Testament, New Testament haven't been doctored along the way?
Oh yeah.
We know that they were.
Well,
the
Exodus,
the
for
New
example.
Testament is all doctrine.
Let me
because it was
bring
written
up-
after
let me
the
bring
We
up
know
an
that
example.
Exodus by itself was written by at least 3 different authors.
The Moses amalgamation.
And Moses was not one of them.
well, he's
Because
He didn't
Moses-
exist at all.
Moses never existed, exactly.
Whoever else.
But your question with regard to that is what?
Well, so you have an example. In all 4 Gospels talk about Jesus entering Jerusalem on a donkey,
Yeah.
except for Matthew, which says
He really
entered-
showed up in a '69 Firebird. Nobody.
The Gospel of Matthew says he showed up on 2 donkeys, and
Which is a little hard
Well,
to ride.
it's hard
2
to
donkeys.
imagine he rode in on 2 donkeys. And
Well, you've seen
a
that
lot
at
of
the
it,
rodeo,
a lot of
right?
these.
I've stood on the windowsill of 2 different vehicles in a drag race. I don't advise this, but I'm sorry. Go
All
ahead.
right.
I want to hear that story later.
I did a little
that
digging
end
on that
badly?
to find out how this came about, and what many current theologians think is that what he was really doing was, when Matthew wrote that gospel, he probably was not written by someone who was a Jew and did not understand Jewish prose, which, I'm sorry,
Matthew didn't even write it.
That's what that's the wrong name. Matthew did so.
The author of Matthew.
The author Matthew, when it was written, did not understand Jewish prose and didn't understand that they often repeated things. He thought they were talking about that the Old Testament was talking about 2 donkeys and not 1 donkey. So it's very clear that the author of Matthew was trying to make it fit.
You'll find, and I think this would interest you as a Christian, you'll find that it's hard to convince a former worldwide person that's now an atheist, because their religion was never based on faith. It was always based on proof. And this is probably true in a number of cults, but we were God's one true church, full stop. Every other church was not just a little bit wrong. Every other church was Satan's,
completely wrong.
Satan's counterfeit. That was the phrase we used. The Methodists, the Baptists, the Catholics, they're all Satan's counterfeits of God's one true church.
They'll divide the followers loyalty, saying, "Look, we're the only group. Like, we're the factory authorized dealership of eternal life." You know? Quite frankly,
But you know what? In one sense, we were very ecumenical, because when we talked about the other churches, we never said they're all going to hell. We just said they're not called, and so it's not their time. And so there'll be a future resurrection. We didn't believe in heaven and hell. We believe the dead are sleeping.
Everybody I know that has tried that on the first swig has said, "Oh goddamn."
Let's reset.
No.
To get started again.
Excuse me.
Hey,
You know
guys,
what's
sorry.
funny? Because I grew up
You've been
without any
nominated.
euphemisms. I
Okay,
never incorporated
let's
them in
do
my
it.
speech. So.
Oh, we're getting a picture?
It's video, not audio, but I mean, it's video, not still, but we're all.
Thank you,
Just
Jim.
Get Chris and Lance,
You want to?
Chris, Lance,
and you, Jim.
Lance,
Is
Chris.
this just a picture? We just, you want
Yeah,
to
we're just doing a group picture.
That's
No,
good.
we're-
not doing the selfie?
Yeah, it's rolling, but I'll make it in. I'm gonna.
Somebody get it.
capture.
I'll find the best part of it.
Everybody pose.
Yeah, of course.
Make me skinny. Suck it.